There's this idea that many people put forward that America right now is governed by just unbridled capitalism, that we have free markets trampling on poor people who have no choice but to go along and be slaves to the capitalists. While this represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what capitalism and free markets really are, it also represents a massive misunderstanding about how much capitalism there really is in the United States. Because the reality is, today, the United States of America is far more communist than most people would like to admit. And to understand why, we really have to go back to the source. Going back to the source is something that many people recommend if they think it will help out their case. For instance, many Christians say, hey, you probably don't understand Christianity that well if you've never read the Bible and you've just listened to other people talk about Christianity. You got to go to the source. Also, many free market proponents and capitalists will say, hey, you've got to go read the source material. You got to see what the original thinkers on this topic said. People like Milton Friedman, Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, and Adam Smith. And guess what? It's the same with communism as well. You've got to go back to the source. In this case, the Communist Manifesto. Communist Manifesto is technically written by Karl Marx, but he wasn't the one that put it together into a book. These were scattered thoughts, and his friend Frederick Engels compiled them together into the book that we now call the Communist Manifesto. And so let's take a look at the source material, at what communism truly is at its heart, to see how much capitalism we have left in America and how much we are actually leaning towards original source material communism. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says, the theory of communists may be summed up in this single sentence: the abolition of private property. And what we are going to look at next is going to be kind of the 10 pillars of communism, and we're going to see how it all kind of falls under that umbrella, that it's all about centralized control, removing any individual's ability to own anything themselves and making them purely into work slaves, labor slaves of the government, the state. Because the abolition of private property extends far beyond actual ownership of like real estate and land. It's really about the abolishment of individual sovereignty. Starting off, the first pillar of communism from the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So people can't own land. We're going to have the government own all land, and then they can tell people where they can live, what they can do with that land, and charge people rents. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, good, we don't have to check off that box, but not so fast. Consider this. What happens if you don't pay your property taxes? Property taxes are essentially rents paid to the government, and if you don't, they will take back that land. And if somebody else has the authority to come and take something back from you for not paying you to use it, then you don't actually really own it. They do. But it goes further than property taxes on the real estate that you own, because the federal government themselves own a ton of land across the United States. In fact, in the West, the government owns 47% of all the land. A recent study by the Cato Institute recently found that the government may be able to get up to $1.8 trillion to auction off the land that it owns, which isn't a ton in the scheme of things, like especially compared to like the national debt. But one of the reasons that land isn't very valuable is precisely because the government owns it. Private ownership of something allows people to transform it into something that has more value. That's what innovation is. That's what invention is. That's what wealth creation is. It's taking raw materials, combining them or changing them in a way to create something that has more value than it used to. That's why all the real estate that actually has a ton of value today got that way from private ownership, and all the land the government owns did not. And so, considering that the first pillar of communism is abolition of private property and putting it in the hands of the government, we are a lot closer to this than not. All right, now let's take a look at number 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. For anybody not aware, progressive or graduated income tax is simply the more you make, the more you pay, and that is 100% the system we have today in America. The tax brackets go from 10% at the lower end up to 37% at the higher end, which means the more you make, the more you pay, which just from a usage standpoint, the argument for taxes, typically it boils down to, okay, well, if you don't pay, nobody wants to pay taxes, who's going to build the roads? As if private companies don't have the ability to own land and lay asphalt. Like, it's a ridiculous argument, but nevertheless, it's the use argument of, hey, everybody has to pay taxes because we all use these common things, these common resources that only the government has the ability to do. If that's the argument, why is the income tax progressive? Why is it graduated? Rich people aren't using more of the roads than poor people. They're not using more public services than poor people. In fact, the wealthier you are, the more you are likely to not use the government services and pay more for private services instead. And so it makes no sense that the more you make, the more you pay from a logical standpoint. But as per the pillars of communism, that is the thing to do. And in America, that is exactly what we do. So box number 1 is half checked and box number 2 is fully checked. We are just barreling along towards communism here. All right, number 3, the abolition of all rights of inheritance. Now, thankfully, we are not fully checking off this box because as of today, if I die, I still have the ability to pass on my wealth to my children. But there is going to be a tax on that. So we are partly there. Even though I've already paid all my taxes on everything that I've earned, paid all the capital gains taxes on everything that I've sold, even though that money has already been taxed, simply by transferring it from me down to my children means, oh, suddenly it gets taxed again. The founding fathers in America recognized the individual rights that are inherent to being human, that I own my body and nobody else does. My body is my property, and that my rights that are inherent to being human extend to the things that I own as well. If I want to give $1 to my children, that should bear no impact on anybody else than if I want to give $10 million to my children. It belongs to me. Why do I not have the right to do what I wish with it? But again, communism is all about centralized control in the hands of the state of all resources and all property, and that humans are just autonomous slaves, drones for the purpose of the state. And so I don't have the right to pass something down to my child, even if I want to. And that's why there are so many pushes for a full 100% inheritance tax always coming up in America, because we've got a lot of communists here. Number 4, the confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. Pretty self-explanatory, and luckily we don't check that box. Next, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Yes, that is 100% just a description of what the Federal Reserve does. We have 100% checked off this box, and it's been that way since 1913. We have a central bank with state capital, state control of credit, and it has an exclusive monopoly on banking and the creation of money. I bet most people didn't know that the existence of a central bank is pillar number 5 for communism, which makes sense because money makes up half of every transaction that happens. So if you can control the money, which you can only do with a central bank, you can control the money, you can somewhat control the flow of resources, everything that happens in an economy. So obviously that's going to be a pillar of communism, and it's going to be antithetical to freedom. Number 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Now, over the last couple of years, it has been very clear how deep the government is involved in the means of communication in the United States, from its influence over the media to its influence over social media platforms, censoring the ability of individual citizens to communicate with one another things that they want to talk about, because essentially that's all social media is. It is communication. Further than that, there are actual state-controlled, government-controlled laws that regulate communication. The flow of information through the internet and through telephones and through cell phone signals, through radios. So they don't 100% outright control all communication, but there is a heavy amount of influence. And centralization of transportation in the hands of the state. Obviously, we've got interstate highways, we've got government-controlled transportation, we've got public transportation. These are all communist things. These are not free market things. Free market is individual, it is privatized, which essentially just means if two people voluntarily want to interact with each other and want to have an exchange, they can do that, and no third party can force them to or stop them from doing it. And if the government can control and have that ownership of transportation to the extent that it does, it has the ability to stop it. And that's where the danger is. Forcing people to move from one location to another or stopping people from being able to move from one location to another. Number 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Essentially, this is all just about controlling the flow of resources. If one person wants to operate a factory to make things and try and sell them for a profit, nope, it's the state that is going to dictate what gets made, who makes it, where it's made, and what allocation of resources go to those things that are getting made. Again, the elimination of individual rights and full control over everything by the ruling class, the government, the state. Number 8, equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Very interesting that the wording choice here is equal liability of all to work. This means that everybody must work and must work equally. So everybody must go to work a specific number of hours, regardless of what they want to do with their time, how much they want to work, how little they want to work. If one person wants to work less because they want to spend a little bit more time with their kids, or a single person wants to work a lot more because they can work overtime and make a lot more money while they're still young and they're single and they don't have kids, doesn't matter. Equal liability of all to work. You're an autonomous drone for the state. Now, at first glance, this may seem like another one of those things that doesn't really apply in America. But in America, the average American works 37.8 hours every single week. Women work, men work, young work, and old work. Almost all are essentially wage slaves, meaning they have no wealth, they have no savings, they have a negative net worth, they're living paycheck to paycheck. And on top of that, when you count federal income tax, as well as state taxes, sales taxes, and other consumption taxes, many people are spending about 50% of all the money they earn just on taxes, which means the first 6 months of the year, all that work they're doing is just to pay the state, the government. And so because of the government, because of the rules, because of the taxes, because of inflation causing 2 people in every household to have to work instead of it used to be just one person in a household could work and make enough for the whole family, we do have a nation where most people have that equal liability to work. They're trapped in the rat race running on that hamster wheel, and they're not going to be able to escape that. And with half of the value of your labor just going to pay the government every single year, this really is a lot closer to that communist ideal. Number 9, the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the populace over the country. Again, just top-down control over the flow of resources, who can do what, where the stuff goes, what is made and what is not made, and where people live, which you do by controlling transportation and owning the land. Just an arbitrary decision here to just spread people out. For what reason? What evidence is given? None. That this would have any beneficial result. What argument or reasoning is there that cities and countrysides existing, towns, delineation between those, some populations close together, some populations spread out, has any negative effect? There is no reasoning or argument. Please go read this book. It's terrible. But apparently that is something that is needed to achieve this communist utopian dream. And then finally, number 10, free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, and a combination of education with industrial production. Now, if you have watched my recent video on the public school system, this will not come as any shock to you. The public school system is designed from the ground up, from when it was started here in America, to create a workforce, an army of employees that is there for the benefit of the government. Because remember, it happened right as soon as the income tax was started as well. So we create a nation of people who are employees. We do that by brainwashing them in schools and training them to become employees. And that's the only thing that they're good at, so that we can tax half of their income. We create a giant population full of taxpayers. And I bet most people don't know that free public schooling, or it's not free, public schooling paid by the state, by taxpayers, is a core tenet of communism. It's so that you can brainwash the children and turn them into work slaves for the state. And it's very interesting that they specifically say the abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. They don't want children working. They don't want children learning useful skills. They want children brainwashed into being just factory machine parts. It's also worth noting that today in America, the only kids who are allowed to work are the children of rich people. Like, I can hire my kids to work in my business, but if you want to just go get a regular job as a kid, you've got to wait until you're, 15 or 16, depending on the state. And if child labor was actually really detrimental, number one, the rich people wouldn't be having their kids work in their companies. And number two, you wouldn't need laws about it, because good ideas don't require force and bad ideas always do. In summary, I highly recommend that everybody go and read the Communist Manifesto, because you will see, number one, all the rebuttals you've ever heard about it are actually logically thought through, and they're not straw man arguments. It's not like people have built up this false image of communism just to be able to tear it down. Go read the source material. You'll recognize immediately there's no arguments, there's no evidence, there's no logic. These are the ramblings of a bitter, contemptuous, envious man who knew nothing about incentives, reasoning, logic, good arguments, and the way that the world really works and what most people actually want. It is a very short read, very easy to understand, despite it being full of just incoherent ramblings of a bitter, evil man. And unfortunately, in America, we are much closer to that communist ideal, considering those 10 pillars, than most people would like to admit. And by the way, for those of you who are interested, I'd like to share with you an update about my membership program, which you could consider kind of like a Netflix for financial literacy. As many of you are aware, I do have courses on my Heresy Financial University that go over things like advanced option strategies, getting out of debt, how to allocate your investments in your portfolio, fundamental investing, and more. But I've been getting more and more of you signing up for my membership program, like I said, which is kind of like Netflix for financial literacy. This membership program includes all of the training material, which means that once you're a member, you get access to the entire training material, everything in the library, and every time I drop a new course, add lessons to current courses, you get access to all of that immediately. Once you're a member, your pricing never changes, although as I add more courses in the future to the library, the pricing for new members will go up. So like I said, this membership itself operates kind of like a Netflix for financial literacy, because everybody tells you how important it is to get a financial education, to become financially literate, but very few people tell you how to actually do it. And this is how you do it. You learn how money works. There's lots of things that people need to understand about the way money works. Things like how to invest, how to allocate your investments inside of your portfolio, fundamental analysis, hedging strategies, advanced options trading strategies, retirement accounts, getting out of debt, basic money management. So you can use actual Netflix and spend 2 hours in a night watching a movie, or you can spend 2 hours taking a course and learn how to get out of debt and be debt-free forever. So if you have been considering any of the courses that I've talked about in the past, I highly recommend considering the membership option, because it's more cost-effective and you get access to everything, again, just like you would if you went and got a Netflix subscription. You get access to all the movies, all the TV shows. Here you get access to all the training material in the whole library and everything that comes out in the future. If you're interested, link is in the description below. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.